Okay, so preliminary warm-up is a couple announcements to start with. Next Saturday from 1 o'clock to 3. 1 o'clock to 3 here, we will have a live webcast from Texas and San Francisco with Keisha Rogers and Mike Steger. And so this takes forward what LaRouche has been really on the case, and that is Texas and California are the strategic questions inside the United States. That we solve the problem of the drought that has swept the entire Southwest and is threatening fundamentally the food supply of the nation. That is our flank. That is our strategic flank to move the population. And we know from our work that we've done in California and Texas that the water officials and some of the public officials are beginning to get it, that there is no solution outside of bringing more water in. We can conserve ourselves to death, but the problem with that is there's no water to conserve. Where it's just not there, right? So the webcast next week will be with Keisha Rogers and Mike Steger, our candidates for Senate and U.S. Congress. 1 o'clock here, so everybody should be here. All right? Now, otherwise, I'm not going to give a big thorough briefing. I want to just situate where we are from the standpoint of some remarks LaRouche made on Thursday night, and that is Obama is moving closer and closer to becoming impeached. He is literally taking impeachment way off the edge of where it should have been done yesterday or last year or 5 years ago. But at this point, he is in such a flight forward toward war that we are, as some put it, we're 2 steps from the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we're 3 steps from nuclear war. And it's not going to take much more. Just quick overview. In this past week, the level of provocation against Russia, but also China now, has reached a new intensity that even we would have thought a couple of weeks ago, they were not that crazy. Well, they are crazy, they are evil, and they are stupid, because that's where they're taking us. Now, General Breedlove, the head of the NATO forces in Europe, has been yelling about every other day or so, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. They're all ready to attack in Ukraine. Meanwhile, NATO has deployed more troops closer to the borders of Russia, F-16s closer to the border of Russia, and U.S. battleship, a Aegis-class battleship, into the Caspian Sea. Now, almost all of this breaks agreements that the United States, NATO have had with Russia over the last 20 years. I'm not going to go through all the agreements, but this is really getting dangerous. And I'll just, there are some people, who are warning. Not only the Russians, Sergei Glasiev, the economic financial advisor to Putin, warned Europe yesterday that if they carry out economic sanctions, it will have more damaging effects on the United States and Europe than on Russia. And if they keep it up, it can lead to World War III. Right? And so you have that. Meanwhile, in a very blunt kind of testimony to the Congress, Admiral Haney, the commander of U.S. Strategic Command, made it very clear in his testimony 2 days ago that, as he said, Russia has maintained and continues to modernize their strategic deterrent capability, and also periodically exercises both their command and control capability to communications. They even put it on YouTube what they're doing. You know, so Russia's not secret about their, in fact, their nuclear war fighting exercises they're carrying out regularly. Right? So you have the warnings. You know? Now, and even the former German general warned yesterday, you know, that anybody who wants to risk a military conflict by pushing toward Russian borders has to be an imbecile. Right? So he's getting, you know, some of these guys are getting a little closer to describing the actual state of mind. You know? So that's what I wanted to cover. Now, Lyndon LaRouche has just made it clear that Obama is so impeachable right now that we have to break the Democratic Party's support of Obama. And the breaks are beginning. We saw it a couple weeks ago with Feinstein's break. There's more action on the NSA, especially after the NSA admitted this week, yes, we have been spying on everybody's emails and phone calls, and we're sorry we lied to Congress about it before. Right? So, so saying you're sorry in these kind of cases for fundamentally violating constitutional rights and for lying to Congress, which is a felony, by the way. You know, so with that, I'm going to conclude with and let Lyndon LaRouche introduce our topic for this evening. That is creativity. And in the webcast LaRouche did yesterday, the last question was his response to what Martin Luther King spoke about on the eve of his assassination, was it 45 years ago, on April 4th, 1968. Yesterday was the anniversary. And and King said in that speech, just to give you just a little sense of what LaRouche is going to respond to, he said, "You may be 38 years old, as I happen to be, and one day some great opportunity stands before you and calls you to stand up for some great principle, some great issue, some great cause. And you refuse to do it because you are afraid. You refuse to do it because you want to live longer. You're afraid because you'll lose your job, or you're afraid that you will be criticized and will lose your popularity, or you're afraid somebody will stab you or shoot you or bomb your house. So you refuse to take a stand. Well, you may go on to live until you are 90, but you will be just as dead at 38 as you would be at 90. And the cessation of breathing in your life is but the belated announcement of an earlier death of the spirit. You died when you refused to stand up for the right. You died when you refused to stand up for truth. You died when you refused to stand up for justice. So that's what Lynn's going to respond to. It's about 7 minutes.
Well, often the thing is treated backwards. The question is, what is the purpose of human life? Now, the animal has an implicit purpose in life, which is to breed its own species and to replenish its stock of people or things or whatever. But the human intention is far different. Now, many people lack that human intention. And that's what you are pointing to when you talk about Martin Luther King's remarks, the latter part of the remarks. Exactly that. Now, I'm a forecaster. I believe in creating the future. I've always spent my life in that direction. I knew that the educational system stunk. I knew it from a very early age. Because I knew I was being told, learn after me. Learn after me. And learn after me people are dead people, because they will never go anyplace except waiting for you to make the next step. Whereas we who are human beings say, well, we have a very short life. And it doesn't take a great genius to understand that the human individual has, in the scheme of things, a very short life. So therefore, what is the meaning of your life? Is the meaning defined within the mere moments of your actual existence? Or is the meaning of your life located in what you as a human being contribute to the society from which you are about to depart? What was all the great scientists, the great scientific discoveries, what did they do? The great poets, the greatest artists, the greatest insight in classical artistic composition, for example. What's the meaning? What was the meaning, for example, in classical music? To go from Bach, which is not the beginning, but was a relative beginning, and it went to something else beyond Bach, but depended upon Bach. And it went from there to next. It went to Mozart. It went beyond Mozart to Beethoven. It went to the later realization of Schubert. It went to the accomplishments of Brahms. It went to the great compositions they produced. And these compositions themselves represented a magnitude beyond anything that had existed before. And then suddenly, at the same time that poor idiots, mathematicians, were saying, there is no future, cancel the future, cancel invention, cancel discovery. It's all a fixed system. It's all numbers, buddy, it's all numbers. It's not life, there's no life, there's only numbers. So, what's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of life if you, as I do, think back to ancient history and think to the great accomplishments of mankind before? You think of the things that were created before but were destroyed or crushed, but then rediscovered or amplified in a new form. That mankind rose from beyond what it had been before into something better. You say, what is the human life? Well, the human life is a speck. The human life is a speck which is an infectious speck, which induces into the coming period of life of mankind, introduces a new concept. And it's the creative process. Now, take the typical guy in the university, the typical guy, the student in the school. What do they believe in? Pass the course. What's that? You take X-lax for that? No. Or is there some other meaning besides X-lax for passing the course? Is there not the possibility that you can discover something which nobody had ever discovered before? And therefore you're not dealing with the same old as you know what? As you were taught before? Is it not the fact that mankind has progressed as the principle of chemistry demonstrates progress? Mankind is the instrument of progress, the biological instrument of progress, the intellectual instrument of progress. We rise from the poor guy who cooked his own meal. And somebody said he was a monkey. He said, no, I'm not a monkey, I'm a man. I'm cooking my own food. Do you want to be cooked? So mankind is a creature which rises to a higher state of qualitative existence by virtue of this commitment to human creativity. And all the progress, chemistry represents, what's the whole principle of chemistry? Now, chemistry, you can explain it in many ways, many people do. But really, you say, what does it really mean, though? It means that the power of mankind to utter and recognize states of nature which have not been previously known to exist, and introducing those new states of nature into creating a higher energy flux density. The perennial fire, the power of fire, to go to ever higher energy flux densities, and to do things on those levels which have never been done before. And that's what you think when you think about Max Planck. You think about the mission of many great scientists. Bernard Riemann. Riemann was a torchbearer. He carried the torch from Gauss to the great scientists who followed him. Without that connection, it wouldn't have happened. So what's the meaning of life? The meaning of life is to foresee what the future can bring, and to make sure you educate and train people who will light the fire which you have sparked. That's the meaning of human life.
Well, I hope that raised some questions in your mind, in addition to being hopefully a little inspired. But questions like, where is creativity found? How is it generated? Of what use is it? And our discussion tonight on Samuel B. Morse hopefully will give you a little direction in discovering some of those answers yourselves as you, as Lynn just described, immerse yourself in that idea of progress, that idea of what it really means to be human. Now, further in our discussion of Samuel Morse, as Lynn has discussed many times before, I think it'll become clear that there's a distinction between what Lynn calls a discovery of a fundamental principles of science and those other discoveries, those other inventions that derive from those fundamental discoveries. And Morse is one of those others. He did not make fundamental principle discovery of universal principles. He applied those. He applied it in a way nobody else had ever actually succeeded in doing before. He created something new that did not exist before. But it was derived from the fundamental discoveries that others before him had developed. And he did work with some of the peoples that actually did make some of those more fundamental discoveries. Now, the creative imagination, which is, hopefully everyone will understand that is our real topic tonight, is expressed most fundamentally in works of classical art, which drive forward scientific creativity. And these two, as LaRouche said in a more recent paper, he said, these two elements of creativity are classical artistic composition and physical science. Treating these two as being separate in their function is the symptom of the systemic idiocy of present day and idiocy, running through in particular Europe and the United States. So the real question politically, socially, in terms of our culture, in terms of our policy, is not to build Nawaba. Yeah, we want to do that. Right? It's not to develop fusion power, and we must do that. But it's to create a culture, a society of what we call discovery-oriented personalities. That you have a overflow of creative discoverers that just overwhelm all the crap and the banality, the stupidity that you unfortunately have to deal with every day. So our job really, politically, is to create a culture of discovery-oriented personalities. Now, Morse was such a personality, a life of creativity. And he was also very, very self-identified as an American patriot, an American who would fight for the principles of his nation. And we'll see some of that as we go along. He was what I like to call a member of the second generation of the American Revolution. He was born in 1791. Washington was president, Alexander Hamilton was Secretary of the Treasury. Right? Now, others in that second generation included like John Quincy Adams, a little bit older than Morse. Right? James Fenimore Cooper, a couple years older than Morse. Abraham Lincoln, about 18 years younger than Morse. Right? But this was the second generation who took forward the principles and the ideas of the first generation of the American Revolution. Now, in the activity of the second generation, you will see an overlap between the first and the second generation. And a key figure in our presentation tonight will be the Marquis de Lafayette, who fought in the American Revolution and then later in the early 1830s worked with Samuel Morse and James Fenimore Cooper in Paris. So but before we actually, well, one other thing on Morse was a general statement. He got disoriented politically. It came, the roots of it came from his religious upbringing and his father's influence. But as you'll see, his disorientation was not only destructive of his own creativity, but really was destructive to the nation. So, now, think of the United States, or really the world, in the early 1800s. And you look back literally for the entire history of civilization, and the only means of travel and the only means of sending a message all the way up until the 1830s and 40s, the only way was to walk or to ride a horse or take a voyage in a sailing ship. And it's hard for us to imagine that if you wanted to go from New York to Chicago, you had to plan at least for 2 to 3 weeks of horseback riding. If you wanted to send a letter from New York to Chicago, it was the same thing, because the letter could only get there in the mailbag of a horse. Right? So think of the level of restricted energy flux density that the culture was actually able to exhibit, or to actually use as a productive force in the continued progress of human civilization. Now, in a less than 20 years period, from the 1830s to the 1850s, this thousands of years history was overturned essentially in the blink of an eye. And it was done through two inventions, two developments. One, the railroads, which began in the late 1820s, really got going in the late 1830s, and the development of the telegraph, which the first serious demonstration showing that it really works was 1844. So, but the telegraph really was a unique invention. Railroad was in certain ways was older, go back maybe 50, 100 years further in at least crude rails with a car rolling on it, maybe without a steam engine, right? But it was really a mere upgrade as the steam engine came into being. Okay? So, but the telegraph made, for the first time, electricity actually useful. You know, there was no use for electricity until the telegraph. You know, it was a curious phenomenon, both in terms of entertainment. You know, you get a bunch of people together and shock them with some static electricity, or maybe a crude battery full of electricity, right? But on the other hand, the serious scientific minds of this entire period, you know, were concentrated on figuring out what this phenomenon was and how to use it. You know, what use could it be? So the telegraph is the first time that it's actually used for anything. And as Hunter will discuss electricity, I'm not going to go into that any further. But with the railroad and the telegraph, you change man's relationship to nature fundamentally. In fact, you change man's relationship to time and space. Okay? Space was seen as, from one standpoint, before the railroad, and another, from another standpoint, after. What would take 2 weeks from New York to Chicago could be done in 2 days. Space was shrunk, right?
Actually,
and the
was
same
that
with
used?
time.
The annihilation of time and space, or some metaphor like that?
You know, not quite annihilation, right? But you shrunk it in terms of railroad. With electricity or the telegraph, you almost annihilate it. You know, it's not quite the speed of light, right? You know, so the message, your letter that you want to send to Chicago, instead of taking 2 weeks by horseback, you know, will be there in 2 seconds. I mean, you just, you know, use your imagination. Think what that kind of transformation made. And Morse, you know, in a certain sense, had a real personal drive when he developed that telegraph. You know, as we'll see in a couple of minutes here. Now, Morse, as I said, was Samuel Finley Breese Morse. Finley and Breese were family names. Born in 1791, died in 1872. He was one of the foremost artists, painters of his time. And of course, the inventor of the telegraph. And like his friend James Fenner Cooper, and very much like the outlook of Alexander Hamilton, you know, Morse feared the mob. the mob, which would be the most dangerous threat outside of the British Empire to the continuation of the American Republic, to its Constitution. And that is the mobocracy, which Andrew Jackson then took advantage of, and then added to that mob kind of behavior and outlook of ignorance and stupidity and anger and hatred, sort of like the Tea Party today. Nothing positive to add, just want to express their anger. Right? So Hamilton put it this way in the Federalist Papers, number 78. He said, "Though I trust the friends of the proposed Constitution will never concur with its enemies in questioning that fundamental principle of Republican government, which admits the right of the people to abolish the established Constitution whenever they find it inconsistent with their happiness. Yet, it is not to be inferred from this principle that the representatives of the people, whenever a momentary inclination happens to lay hold of a majority of their constituents, incompatible with the provisions in the existing Constitution, would, on that account, be justified in a violation of those provisions." So, and I somewhat mentioned, but I'll say it a little bit more formally here, I will cover a biography of Morse, and Hunter will pick up as Morse transitions from an artist into the inventor of the telegraph. And Hunter will also develop the necessary background that you need to know in terms of the principles of electricity and its development, which led, was the forerunner of Morse's invention. So Morse, born in Massachusetts, 1791, his father was Jedidiah Morse, who was a minister, the pastor of the Congregational Church, a Calvinist, a descendant from the original Pilgrims, a very fundamentalist kind of outlook. But in addition, he was something else. He was considered, at that time, the late 1700s, all the way up maybe to the middle of the 1800s, he was considered to be the father of American geography. And he published geography books and studies, and he was well known throughout, universities, colleges, schools, and in the country. That's his father. He was also a New England Federalist, right, of the worst sort in the early 1800s. The ones who looked to Britain, to London, to England, as the model of what the United States should be instead of what it was under our Constitution. And in fact, had it not been for his son Samuel Morse, his father would have openly sided with the British in the War of 1812. And Morse warned him that that to do so would not only be treason against the United States, but you would be playing the fool for the British, who laugh at your foolishness. Right? Morse entered Yale at the age of 16, graduating in 1810. He met, at Yale, where he picked up on what his youthful inclination was, which was drawing and painting, and really began concentrating on artistic work. But he had another interest, and that was science. And he was extremely enthused by his science classes at Yale, especially those that were doing experiments in electricity. And his favorite and closest professor was Benjamin Silliman, one of the most famous and prominent science teachers of the early 1800s in the United States. At Yale, he met Washington Allston, who was the most prominent American artist in that early 1800 period. Morse graduated in 1810, and he went with Allston and Allston's wife to Britain, to London, to study art. Now this is 1810. He arrives in 1811. Right? And what's 1811? Well, you know, it's heating up. You know, the British are impressing American seamen, provoking and abusing the United States. The United States is now got a Congress that says we're not going to put up with this any longer. We're going to go to war. And war was declared in 1812. The War of 1812, our second war of independence against the British Empire. Now, his letters to his parents from London, I mean, he's stuck in London. Right? There's no relations between the U.S. and London anymore. You know, there's a war going on. Right? So he's studying art. And he writes letters, though. They go through the French or they go some other direction to get to the United States. Letters to his parents, you know, expressed two things. One, his foremost hope to become the greatest history painter of the era, the painting of historical scenes and topics. And secondly, that he would sure as hell like to come back to the United States and join the U.S. military and kick the British in the butt. You know? He said in one letter, quote, "The only way to please John Bull," that's Britain, "is to give him a good beating. And such is the singularity of his character that the more you beat him, the greater is his respect for you, and the more he will esteem you." You know? And he complained to his father in the letters, you know, about the treasonous behavior of the Federalists of New England, and hoped, as I mentioned before, that his father would realize that the British were playing you and your friends for fools. Morse did not believe in the separation of art and politics or art and science, right? But he really believed in American independence, and also that American artists must develop a distinctive culture expressing the principles of the United States, its Constitution, its character, and its people, and not kowtow to British so-called artistic opinion. It was in this period, of May 2nd, 1814 letter, he begins defining his future, what he really, really wanted to do. Right? He said, the Americans at present stand unrivaled, and it is my great ambition to stand among the first. My country has the most prominent place in my thought. How shall I raise her name? How can I be of service in refuting the calumny so industriously spread against her that she has produced no men of genius? It is this, more than anything else, aside from painting, that inspires me with a desire to excel in my art. It arouses my indignation and gives me a tenfold energy in the pursuit of my studies. I should like to be the greatest painter purely out of revenge. Right? His first painting that was exhibited to the public was called The Dying Hercules, which was not only well received in England, but had actually brought him some recognition in the United States.
Is there a way to fill up the whole page with this? Is there a way to fill up the whole page with this?
Yeah, there's a way.
Yeah, the little slider on the
Enter,
bottom.
you know,
Slider on the bottom? This? I don't know what
the
that.
other way.
I know, shouldn't you use Ovid's right?
No, not that.
uh,
The bottom of the slider.
yeah,
Go
that's-
left. A little bit more left. Yeah, okay. Anyway, so this is a 20-year-old guy painting this, right? He also painted, while in London, The Judgment of Jupiter. And Morris's view was, this is an allegory. It's a picture of Jupiter, God, bringing down his justice on England for its crimes against the United States. So, I don't understand it quite, but that's the way Morris was thinking about it. Okay? Now, because his finances were always precarious, and of course there's a war on, so it's difficult for his father to send him any money, Morris undertook to sell some of his paintings. And in the course of that, which he found to be a very unpleasant task, he developed a lifelong view of those whose primary identity is business. They're brutes, he concluded, quote, groveling, avaricious, devotees of mammon, whose souls are narrowed to the studious contemplation of a hard-earned shilling. So he returned to the United States in 1816. So he's about 25 years old now. He married in 1818, and he supported himself and his growing family, 3 children, by doing portrait painting, which he was fairly successful at, and was actually making a fairly good living for a few years. And but he still had his mind on invention. He and his brother put together several inventions, including what was called a flexible leather piston, right, which I have a picture of it somewhere, but I didn't put it up here. So in 1821, now he's 30 years old now, he painted the House of Representatives, which for him was a symbol of his fierce anti-British outlook. Now this is the way Morris looked at it himself. He saw it as reflecting the young republic's seriousness, its stability, and the grandeur of its institutions. And he actually spent several months in the House of Representatives, and he individually painted all of the current members of Congress. And if you get a very close-up of detail of the faces of the members of Congress, and you personally knew them, you'd recognize them, right? So this is a fairly large, it really kind of gave him a recognition within the country, as being the foremost artist in the United States at the time. In 1824, he won the commission to paint the portrait of Lafayette. Now, 1824 is when Lafayette came to the United States, 50 years, almost 50 years after the Declaration of Independence. And Lafayette spent a year touring the United States. So Lafayette's in Washington, D.C., and Morse goes down to Washington, D.C. to meet with Lafayette. Then they're introduced, and Morse begins painting Lafayette's portrait. 1824 was also the U.S. presidential election, and it resulted in the election of John Quincy Adams. You know, our second in line in terms of the real American system political leaders after Hamilton. But Morse was awed by Lafayette. And he wrote a letter to his wife from Washington, D.C. He said, you know, just some excerpts from it. He said, "This is the man now before me, the very man who spent his youth and his fortune and his time to bring about our happy revolution, the friend and companion of Washington, the terror of tyrants, the firm and consistent supporter of liberty, the man whose beloved name has rung from one end of this continent to the other, whom all flock to see, whom all delight to honor. This is the man, the identical man." You really get a sense of his excitement and happiness of actually meeting Lafayette. That's Morse's portrait of Lafayette. But having just begun the work on the portrait, he got a letter from his father up in, I think they were in Connecticut at the time, you know, that his wife had died essentially almost 2 weeks earlier. She may not have ever read that letter that I just read the excerpts from. So that left Morse with 3 children. And this weighed on his mind. Had there been a telegraph, he would have known it in a minute, and he could have jumped on a train, you know, which didn't exist in 1824, you know, and been up at his wife's bedside before she passed away. But as it was, he didn't know for 10 days to 2 weeks till after she had died, after she had been buried, that she had passed away. So Morse left Washington, D.C., left his work on the portrait of Lafayette and went back home. And then later in the year, when Lafayette was in New York City, they resumed the sittings for the portraits. And in New York City, a man who was soon to become a very close personal friend of Morse was one of the hosts of Lafayette's tour of the city, and that's James Fenimore Cooper. Later, from 1829 to 1833, Morse and Cooper are together in Paris, and they became very close, intimate friends with each other, and the 3 of them, Lafayette making up the 3rd, you know, a collaborative and very intimate group of political revolutionaries and, of course, artists. In 1826, Morse initiated the founding of the National Academy of Design in New York City, of which he was president of for many, many years. It was run for young artists, so that young artists could be independent of rich patrons who attempted to control and guide their artwork. Morse, in that position, gave lectures on art and really put American artists on a firm intellectual foundation. In one lecture, for example, he expressed his intent to create an audience for art. He said, "What use is it for the artist to cultivate his own taste if those around him are incapable of feeling and appreciating the beauties which are spread before them. And during this period, he attended lectures on electricity given in New York City, keeping up with new knowledge developing in the field. In 1829, he headed for Europe, first to Italy, where he spent several months. And mostly what he was doing is studying his art. You know, he hated Venice, which he spent a week or two in, but he loved Rome for one reason. The Vatican Library, which has the Raphael paintings, and he spent 5 or 6 weeks alone in making a copy of the School of Athens by Raphael, and Morse considered Raphael to be the world's greatest artist. His father's anti-Catholicism, right, began emerging in Morse while he was in Italy. Right? His view was that this Catholic country, you know, had a foundation in a belief system and a structure that was enforced on people. He called it a religion of force, rather than a voluntary choice. But still, Morse studied the Catholic religion and the churches and the culture from the standpoint of an artist, and found the art and music of the Catholic services and the churches very beautiful, which led him, interestingly, to question the power of his own art. His painting aimed at uplifting and creating an independent, creative population, one that had moral refinement and a respect for Republican ideals. But he thought, might the sensuous appeal of color and form, as he saw in the Catholic churches, promote instead, like Catholicism did, as he put it, a religion of the imagination. A religion of fantasy is really what he meant. You know, imagination, not the way we talk about it as creativity, but of fantasy. But he remained persuaded that when properly employed by the painter, the medium would communicate truths to the understanding. But there clearly was danger, and that without enlightened piety, a love for art could sink into heartlessness and frivolity. Now, one way to look at Morse's prejudice toward the Catholic religion might be from the standpoint of an 1863 French novel called Paris in America by Edward René Laboulaye. Now, Laboulay's view is that America's deeply felt piety, rather than mere membership in an established church, was a key foundation of America's freedom. On the other hand, he put it, the discipline of an established church might make individuals more governable, creating a more submissive personality in the population. Which, of course, that submissive personality is exactly the quality an oligarchy always seeks to create within a population. Now, he arrived in Paris in 1830, and he lived a few doors from Lafayette's apartment and a few more doors from Cooper's apartment. And Cooper had been in Paris since, or in Europe since 1826. Right? And about every evening, Morse would spend at Cooper's apartment with Cooper and his family. He and Morse enthusiastically joined with Cooper and Lafayette in their political work, becoming a third, though not the key guy as Cooper and Lafayette were, because all of Europe was in revolutionary upheaval in the 1830 period. There were revolutions in every country going on. And the revolutionaries, win or lose at some point, would end up in Paris. And they would go to Cooper's house or Lafayette's house. And they were literally coordinating all the revolutions throughout the continent at that time. But Morse's stay in Paris for about a year was spent in the Louvre, where for 8 to 10 hours a day for an entire year, every day but Sunday, he would be there working on his masterpiece, which is the Gallery of the Louvre. Slow,
It takes a while to make the gallery of the Louvre.
Okay. So this painting, which is huge, it's like 8, 10 feet across, something like that. Right? The plan he and Cooper together had was to take this back to the United States and tour it from city to city. Photography did not exist. The only way you could see what a Raphael or a Rembrandt or a Leonardo painting looked like was if some painter had made a copy of it. Right? So what Morse did is he put 37 individual masterpieces in one painting. Right? That's what you have here. Right? The greatest European artists, Titian, Rembrandt, Leonardo, Raphael, Caravaggio, Veneris, Rubens, Reni, among others. Okay? And in the painting, Morse gets a little personal. So this is Morse. My laser just died. Okay, that's Morse. And that's a student that he's teaching, and her face is very similar to his own daughter's face, right? But his daughter's not in Paris, but he used her face in that picture. And then back here is James Fenimore Cooper, his wife, and his daughter Susan there. Right? And then some of the other figures are also part of the Cooper-Morse artistic grouping in Europe at the time. Now, it was during this period, Cooper remembers much later, that Morse first mentioned his idea for a telegraph. In Cooper's novel, The Sea Lions, on page 161, Cooper writes, "We pretend to no knowledge on the subject of the dates of discoveries in the arts and sciences, but well do we remember the earnestness and single-minded devotion to a laudable purpose with which our worthy friend first communicated to us his ideas of the subject of using the electric spark by way of a telegraph. It was in Paris during the winter of 1831-32 and the succeeding spring, and we have satisfaction in recording this date that others may prove better claims if they can." Now, as Morse prepared to return to the United States in 1832, he mused and thought about how his political views, had really risen to the boiling point. And he was more clear than ever in his own mind of the difference between a Europe dominated by an oligarchy and that of the American Republic. He thought that Europe, above all else, was sinister. Everywhere he had felt the oppression of church and state with their attendant ignorance and poverty. He appreciated even more keenly than ever how America's precious political liberty depended on its foundation in Protestantism. Right? So this is coming to the surface. You'll see more, and it becomes really ugly. Which he thought was a religion of persuasion, not of force. That's the way he was looking at it. Right? Morse had also come to understand why European governments so often attacked the United States. They're the Republican institution of the United States. He thought they dreaded change. They feared that America's example to the people of Europe would become infectious and threaten their class privileges and possibly foment revolution. You know? And Morse wrote at the time, he said, "Our simple existence as a nation keeps hope alive in the breast of the patriots of Europe." Back in New York City, so we're 1833 now, he took a position as professor of painting and sculpture at the University of the City of New York. And this is the first such position that existed in any university in the country. Right? In a letter about early 1833, actually it was to James Farmer Cooper, he expressed his belief in what his life's mission was, you know, for humanity, for the nation. And in it you begin to see even more clearly, as it becomes more clear in his mind, how he's locating his identity in the future. Right? You know, that's where I live, in the future. He says, quote, "I have been told several times since my return that I was born 100 years too soon for the arts in our country. I have replied that if that be the case, I will try and make it but 50. And if I can in my day so enlighten the public mind as to make the way easier for those that come after me, I don't know that I shall have not served the cause of the fine arts as effectively as by painting pictures, which might be appreciated 100 years after I'm gone." Now, acknowledging the difficulty of carrying out that mission, now this is 1833, Andrew Jackson is president. Right? The nation, its population, its intelligence, and its political culture are degenerating. Right? And Morse wrote later that year, October 1833, in a letter, he says, "Are not the refining influences of the fine arts needed, doubly needed now in our country? Is there not a tendency in the democracy of our country to low and vulgar pleasures and pursuits, when those who are exalted to office, who best can flatter the low appetites of the vulgar, when boorishness and ill manners are preferred to polish and refinement, and when indeed the latter, if not avowedly, are in reality made an objection, is there not danger to those who would otherwise encourage refinement?" But Morse was not a pessimist. You know, he added a footnote to this letter and wrote, "These were once my fears. There is doubtless danger, but I believe in the possibility, by the diffusion of the highest moral and intellectual cultivation through every class, of raising the lower classes in refinement. But disappointed in the state of culture and mind and receptiveness of the American people to fine art at that time, and the fact that the political class excluded him from commissions as really the leading painter of the era. But he was excluded from all commissions of painting the murals in the Capitol building. Right? So he was very discouraged, and he said, "I've had it," you know. So he's about 40 years old now, and he'll live another 40 years. But he turned his back on painting, and he turned his activity to his idea of the invention of the telegraph. Now, so he begins early 1830s, especially beginning after 1834, you know, virtually full-time, working on how to create a telegraph. Right? And his favorite Bible quotation is, "Woe unto you when all men shall speak well of you." And he did not like making enemies. But early in his career, he became convinced that no man could accomplish anything of real value in this world without encountering opposition. Some who may disagree with you may be sincere, but the self-seeking and dishonest and unscrupulous will come after you. Right? And as inventor of the telegraph, like other men who have achieved greatness, that made him the target for all kinds of abuse, slanders, accusations, lying, deceit, treachery. He was accused of everything. Right? You know, much like political leader we know today. And although he was betrayed and cheated for the next 20 years, as people tried to steal his patents, steal his ideas, cheat him out of this, cheat him out of that, you know, I mean, he was very distracted. You know, maybe he would have invented the light bulb, you know, by 1860, had he not been so damn distracted by all this crap, right? But very ironically, one man who came to his defense, became his close friend, ally, defender, and ran his finances honestly, you know, was a man named Amos Kendall, who, now this is late 1830s, earlier, it was about, actually it's in the 1840s, right? Now Kendall, earlier, had been Andrew Jackson's right-hand man in destroying the first bank of the United States. Did Kendall change? Did he say, you know, I got to make up for the evil I committed by befriending and helping Morse? You know, that's another question. I think it's up in the air. But after a decade of fighting off the first round of thieves who tried to steal the patent, the Supreme Court ruled in 1854 that Morse was the inventor of the telegraph. The first successful transmission, 1844, between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. And within a decade, by the 1850s, the country was covered with telegraph lines. And Morse forecast at the time, in the mid to late 1840s, that very soon there would be a connection between the United States and Europe by telegraph. And everybody said he was crazy. You know, that can never be done. Right? Well, the first transatlantic cable was completed in 1866. It would have been sooner, except you had 5 years of Civil War in there. Right? And I'm going to stop on the telegraph here, and Hunter will pick it up and develop it. But I want to just complete my section with rounding out the rest of Morse's political and and activities in life. Now, it's in the 1830s that this anti-Catholicism, this fundamentalist, the worst side of Jonathan Edwards' Puritan fundamentalism, which is what his father actually was, communicated and transmitted to Morse himself. But so Morse's view by the 1830s was Catholicism was an absolute threat to the continued existence of the Republic of the United States. And this was being carried out through massive Catholic immigration from Italy, from Ireland, and stuff, and other places. Right? So he began writing articles for newspapers. Right? Began lecturing on it. He wrote a 200-page book called Foreign Conspiracy Against the Liberties of the United States. The theme of it was that this Catholic attack was being guided by the European oligarchy to destroy Republican government. Right? And behind this, really the brains behind it was Prince von Metternich, the guy who Kissinger loves so much, the creator of the Holy Alliance and the orchestrator of the Congress of Vienna that has reestablished dictatorships over all of Europe after the end of the Napoleonic Wars. Now in 1835 he became the public spokesman of the Native American Democratic Association, the first anti-immigrant political party in the country, which then, there were several that developed, but the major one develops in the 1850s, called the Know-Nothings. They would go around and say, I don't know nothing. And Morse became not only a major spokesman for the Know-Nothings, but also a political candidate for mayor twice of New York, and then one run for U.S. Congress. Now this is funny, in 1836 he ran for New York mayor, and he came in last with 1,500 votes. Now his friend Cooper joked about a mere 1,500 votes. Cooper wrote, the fellow actually got 1,500 votes, and he would have been elected had he got just 15,000 more. Now in the 1850s, as the slavery question begins dividing and exciting the country, sometimes very violently, especially after the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1850, Morse turned his rhetoric against the abolitionists. He was horrified by the election of Abraham Lincoln, and then saw the Civil War as the worst nightmare possible had come true. He blamed the abolitionists for the war, and he placed his sympathies with what he called the Christian slaveholders, whom he thought had played into the hands of the abolitionists, though he condemned secessionism as an evil heresy, as evil as the abolitionists. Right? Now during the war, Civil War, he published a 40-page pamphlet called The Present Attempt to Dissolve the American Union, where he puts the sponsorship and the manipulation of the country into the war, onto Britain. He said the British had manipulated the Americans to fight each other. So even while deluded, he still did understand one truthful thing, that yes, the evil British were behind the Civil War. Now, during the war, continued during the war, he began writing articles to prove that slavery was justified by the Bible, anchoring his arguments again in his Calvinist religious beliefs and promoting openly, explicitly, the idea that blacks are inferior to whites, and God made the black race to be slaves of the white race. Right? You can see how he's really gone off. Now, ironically, Morse's invention, the telegraph, this is 1860s, right? Telegraph has been spread all over the country for a decade almost. Right? But, so ironically, you know, the inventor of the telegraph, though sympathies with the Confederacy, it was due to the North's greater industrial power that the North was able to make use of the telegraph, you know, 100 times more effective use than the Confederacy was. Right? So Morse helped the North win the Civil War, despite himself. Now, at the end of the Civil War, 1866, the completion of the first transatlantic telegraph, Morse is now hailed as the great inventor. And though really disappointed in 30 years earlier in that he was not the one to do the paintings, the mural paintings in the Capitol, especially the Capitol's rotunda. Now, the ceiling of that rotunda is the painting by Bruimindi called the Apotheosis of Washington. And in that painting is Samuel Morse in company of Ben Franklin, Robert Fulton, and Minerva, goddess of the arts. So this is the painting. It's visible through the oculus, which is the circular opening at the center of a dome. Right? So you're like laying on the floor, you're looking straight up. The ceiling, or the dome, top, you know, the ceiling, the dome of the Capitol building. Now, the painting is 180 feet above the floor. And the figures, each of the figures you see there are as large as 15 feet, each figure. So they're all visible from the floor. Now there's 6 scenes in the painting. Now Washington is in the center or somewhere there. We'll see, but before we go to the detail. Right? And then there's 6 scenes, starting at the bottom. The first scene is war, and then clockwise to the left, science, marine or sailing, commerce, mechanics, and agriculture. Right? So we'll see the detail now. This is the men of science section of the painting. And you can't see it from here really, but you have Ben Franklin, Morse, Fulton, and others, you know, in the painting there. Now, in addition, many American homes had copies of Christian Schussele's Men of Progress painting, with Morse in the middle of 19 American inventors sitting in one room. In December 1868, Morse was honored at a banquet given in his honor in New York City. The banquet was presided over by the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Salmon Chase. Letters were read from President Andrew Jackson Johnson and from General Grant. Governor Alexander Bullock of Massachusetts' letter, I lost my pages. But the governor wrote, Massachusetts honors her two sons, Ben Franklin and Morse, The one conducted lightning safely from the sky, the other conducts it beneath the ocean from continent to continent. The one tamed the lightning, the other makes it minister to human wants and human progress. Now, David Huntington was one of those who spoke at the celebration, and he, more than anything I've looked at, really connects up Morse's art and science as both being expressions of human creativity. And Huntington said, in fact, however, every studio is more or less a laboratory. The painter is a chemist, delving into the secrets of pigments, varnishes, mixtures of tints, and mysterious preparations of grounds, and overlaying of colors, occult arts, by which the inward light is made to gleam from the canvas, and the worn flesh to grow and palpitate. As an artist, he's speaking to Morse, as an artist, you might have spent life worthily in turning God's blessed daylight into sweet hues of rainbow colors and into breathing forms for the delight and consolation of men. But it has been His will that you should train the lightnings, the sharp arrows of His anger, into the swift yet gentle messengers of peace and love. And on the 10th of June, 1871, a statue of Morse was dedicated and unveiled in New York's Central Park. The statue was paid for by $1 contributions from thousands of telegraph operators throughout the United States and Canada. So you can see the statue in Central Park today. And that evening, another ceremony was held at the Academy of Music in New York City, and hundreds attended to honor Morse. Now, a table was placed in the center of the stage on which the original instrument used for the first telegraph line between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore was placed on this table. And it was connected to all the telegraph lines in the world. You know, that included Asia, Japan, China, all of Europe, even into the Middle East, and even into Egypt. Right? Now, as thousands of greetings poured in over the telegraph lines into the hall, Morse sent out the following message in return. Greetings and thanks to the telegraph fraternity throughout the world. Glory to God in the highest, on earth, peace, goodwill to men. And as he tacked out his name, a signature, the click of the instrument being clearly heard in every part of the house and is clearly understood by the hundreds of telegraphers present, so that without waiting for the final dot, which typified the letter E, the whole vast assembly rose amid deafening cheers and waving of handkerchiefs. When the excitement had died away, the chairman, Mr. Orton, said, "Thus, the father of the telegraph bids farewell to his children." And in Morse's address to the audience, he said, "In the carrying out of any plan of improvement, however grand or feasible, no single individual could possibly accomplish it without the aid of others. We are none of us so powerful that we can dispense with the assistance in various departments of the work of those whose experience and knowledge must supply the needed aid of their expertise. It is not sufficient that a brilliant project be proposed, that its mode of accomplishment are foreseen and properly devised. There are in every part of the enterprise other minds and other agencies to be consulted for information and counsel to perfect the whole plan. And he went on then to give due credit to all those who came before him, the scientists who Hunter will discuss and those he worked with, including those who betrayed him after working with him. He gave them the due credit that they had contributed. Morse died on April 2nd, 1872. He was mourned as the inventor of the age, all his political views being ignored. And on the 100th anniversary of the first telegraph message sent May 15th, 1844, from the Capitol building, the U.S. Congress reenacted the event in 1944, May 15th, 1944, and sent out a message from the House of Representatives to all the world. This is the middle of World War II. Right? The U.S. Post Office issued a commemorative stamp, and a new Liberty ship was launched, christened the Samuel F.B. Morse. As with all technologies, the telegraph had its day, which began to come to an end with the invention of another machine called the telephone. And then the satellite signals, and then, more recently, digital fiber optic cables. Western Union sent its last Morse code telegram in 1960. The last of the transatlantic telegraph cables were abandoned in 1966. In the 1990s, the U.S. military and Coast Guard phased out Morse code in their operations. Morse code today is only used by the Boy Scouts and some radio amateurs. Though these new tools may be more powerful and efficient than Morse's old telegraph, in principle, they do nothing more than what Morse had given the world 170 years ago. Now, Hunter Cobb is going to discuss the science behind Morse's telegraph and a summary history of its invention and development. And here you see Morse code. Does anybody know Morse code, ever knew it? Besides me?
SOS?
No?
A little
I
bit.
only know SOS.
We learned it in Boy Scouts. Right? So,
Now,
wait.
okay, go ahead.
But here you see the Morse code, which Morse developed as the language of the telegraph. Now, look at it quickly and in a concentrated way, because Hunter is going to do his presentation in Morse code.
All right.
Okay.
Now, it's called Morse code, but there were actually multiple wire telegraphs before Morse invented the two-wire telegraph. Now, do you know what sort of code they used? This was over in London or something.
He will cover that.
I'll mention that.
Here's a laser.
Yeah, okay. So, we've got a short amount of time here, but we'll maybe. Yeah, I gotta move it though, because I gotta do some others up there. So, I'll try to sit here. Well, you can kind of sit sideways here, I guess. Okay, so we'll try to do this fairly efficiently. When most people today think about electricity, you think about wires, electric lights, motors, computers, things like that. But this involves electric currents in wires, and this is something that didn't exist until about 200 years ago. And it's an entirely man-made phenomenon. Electric currents in wires didn't exist before that. Electric phenomena existed. In ancient times, the Greeks knew about electric phenomena. I'm going to do a few things to demonstrate some electrical phenomena, and with Drew's assistance, we're going to project some things on the screen here. We're going to need this to be blacked out most of the time. Yeah. Turn it off, I guess. Turn that off. Yeah, you can keep that in, but just turn that off.
No.
Don't turn it off.
Take whatever time you need, Hunter, don't feel pressed, really.
Okay.
You just switch the input.
I recognize that plate.
Okay.
Did you switch the input?
Recognize that tea bag.
Did you switch the input?
What's that?
Did you switch to the studio?
Let him do concentrate, you and us.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Okay, that's good. So, in the so the Greeks discovered that amber, fossilized resin, if you rubbed it, it would attract dust and hair and stuff. Some especially precocious Greeks noticed that styrofoam cups with they would attract tea leaves and coffee, as you can see.
We can't see it on the screen.
You
We have it on the screen.
Oh, I moved it. Yep, sorry. Anyway, you can see it there. Okay. So this is the kind of thing that was known about electricity for hundreds and hundreds of years. There was not a lot done to investigate electricity until
Did you
this.
say that was, Hunter? You just kind of, you didn't say exactly what process took place when you did that.
What's that?
You didn't say what process took place when you did that.
Well, I say this was what was known, that something was going on.
Oh,
Way
just
things were,
Yeah. That there was an attraction,
right.
and it happened with amber. In fact, the term electricity is actually derived from the term amber, from the word amber. But that was about all that was known for hundreds of years. There was this curious attraction of, related to amber. Until the 17th century, 18th century, some rigorous scientific investigation started to be made. And then it was discovered that there appeared to be two different kinds of electricity. If you rub amber, you got an attraction of certain things. If you rub glass, you got a different kind. And if you connect them, if you held two things together, you get a spark. It was thought of that there were different kinds of fluid. And Benjamin Franklin did experiments, and he hypothesized that it wasn't two different kinds of fluid, but it was basically one kind of, it was basically what they called, well, one was called resinous electricity, the other was called vitreous electricity. He hypothesized there was just one, but one was an abundance, an overabundance of something, and the other was a lack of something. So, and that's how he actually referred to them as positive and negative. That's how he came to call it positive and negative charge.
That's where we got the term positive and negative from?
Right.
Franklin?
I'm not sure if he was the first one, but he was the one who hypothesized that that's what was going on. One thing that was invented in 1745 was a way of collecting and storing this charge, this what we call static electricity, and it's called a Leyden jar, after the city called the Dutch city of Leiden, which is there are two places, one in Germany and one in Leiden, where they independently made this discovery. So I'm going to demonstrate this process. So here's my, I need this piece of PVC pipe. So what we have here is a plastic bottle with aluminum foil inside, taped to the inside, and aluminum foil on the outside. And then we have a screw in the top with a chain of paper clips. So basically you have an electrical connection from the inside up to this screw, and that's totally separate from the one on the outside. So you got
Are the paper clips touching the foil on the inside?
on the inside,
Okay.
yeah, that's the idea. So the idea is to get some
Rubber sock on a piece.
charge. Yeah, you can use
Now that's a
for
wool sock?
This is what
nylon or
Franklin did
something.
too.
So,
Wait,
and then you rub it against here, transfer the charge.
what did Franklin use? Except I'm sure he didn't have a PVC pipe.
No, they used,
Could they use the glass rod and,
yeah, sometimes use glass, sometimes use amber, sometimes, I guess they developed, what did they use?
So you're basically rubbing electrons off of that thing into the jar? Or rubbing force, or whatever they call it at the time?
Yeah, I don't know, I'm not sure which way it's going actually, whether they're coming off or they're going on, but that's the idea.
Well, if you can find a copy of the political economy of the American Revolution, it's got a picture of one of the Franklin's static electricity generating machines.
You're gonna hear it now too.
Yeah, you can hear little sparks. So if you do this a few times,
Is that a plastic one?
it's a plastic jar, you can use,
No, a rod.
this is, you know, it's a kind of plastic, you know, polyvinyl chloride. Now, I think if we turn off the light, I don't know how that, you know how that camera will work if we turn off the light? Will it?
it might show a spark, I don't know. Oh, you can see it a
That's
little
even better.
bit.
Oh, yeah. That'll be good. So what I'm gonna do then is have, with a wire, connect the two, holding the wire close,
You
but
can-
not,
Hold it lower, we might see a spark from the camera. I don't know, it will show.
we'll do
that.
one more and then we'll test it
No, we're not seeing it.
here. Okay.
Oh, turn the wrong place off?
That's good enough. Okay, now, I'm gonna hold, actually, you wanna turn the light on just for a minute, I'll show you what I'm doing. Okay, I'm gonna hold this wire to touch the outside, and then the other end I'm gonna bring close to the nut on the top. Okay, you wanna turn the light on? Okay. So, here we go.
Okay, so,
Okay.
okay, that's total discharge there?
Yeah.
Not to run too much on that battery.
Turn the light on.
Okay, turn the light on.
Do it one more time.
You wanna do it once more?
Quick.
You do it.
It's gonna take that whole process.
Just wear some fleece
Yeah.
and fleece blanket.
Yeah, we got a bunch more things to do. Maybe we can do it afterwards. Because there are a bunch more things we gotta do here. But,
Turn it off for a second.
there are many ways to make these Leyden jars. I had to experiment around.
Where's
It's funny, when I was doing this one,
this? Okay.
I didn't like the fact that the nut was kind of over to the side, and I started to move it over, and boom, got a little shock.
Here's a painting of Ben Franklin capturing the
Yeah, we missed that.
electricity from the air. Now, this painting was by Benjamin West, who was the famous late 1700 painter who'd moved to London and spent the rest of his life there. And when Morse went to London, he became a student of Benjamin West.
And he also was collaborator with that before he went to
So, you know, contrary to the popular opinion, Franklin's experiment, he didn't, the kite was not actually struck by lightning. But what he did was he had, the kite actually went through a cloud, and there was, what he demonstrated, that there was a charge, that in doing this, he demonstrated that, that there actually was an electrical phenomenon going on in a thunderstorm and with lightning. So he demonstrated that the lightning is an electrical phenomenon. Then in 1771, the Italian physician Luigi Galvani was investigating muscle contraction of animals, and in particular studying frogs, frog legs. And he noticed that electrical sparks, when applied, would cause the muscles to contract. But he made a discovery that sometimes he'd get this, the frog legs would jump even when he didn't apply an electric spark. And he was trying to figure that one out. And he thought it had to do with something with animal electricity, they were calling it. But the physicist Alessandro Volta observed this. And he said, no, it's not animal electricity. He said, what's going on is you have two different kinds of metal. You've got the metal of the pan that the leg of the frog is in, and you have the metal scalpel, which is a different kind of metal, and that's what's key to what's going on. And to test that hypothesis, he created, just without the biological tissue at all, he just took two different pieces of metal and soaked a piece of cloth in salt water and put it between them in kind of like a sandwich, and was able to create an electrical spark in that way. And we'll demonstrate that.
The frog leg?
We don't have the frog leg. We'll do it without the frog leg.
Poor frogs, they really got the bad side of the big flower.
the first thing you dissect.
I never have to do the frog, we went straight to the pig fetus.
No, this one we'll do with, I have some nickels and pennies. We have two different kinds of metal. Yeah, I need those pennies and I need those nickels. I appreciate the help I got from my friends. And I have some little piece of cardboard that I've soaked in vinegar and salt. So I'll put actually I have a piece of aluminum here, which would be helpful. Okay, I'll put the nickel on a piece of aluminum, which will help to content. So I put a piece of I put one nickel on the piece of aluminum, then the cardboard soaked in vinegar, then the copper penny.
The vinegar acts as the salt water.
Right. The vinegar, and it does have salt in it too.
Well, it acts as a,
Conveyor.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
what's an electrolyte?
Getting-
I know it's in a battery.
Yeah, that's what electrolyte is. It's just,
Honestly, charges
okay, so I'm alternating. I'm going to make several of them. This is actually what a battery is.
I was just about to say you're making a battery.
Yeah, I'm making a battery. See, a battery actually means more than one.
Do all the pennies have vinegar and salt?
No.
I'm putting a piece of cardboard in between each one. And this is what Alessandro Volta did.
Is that the cardboard you're putting on right now?
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
Now I know why Ben Franklin said a penny saved is a penny earned.
And don't take any wooden nickels.
Yeah, they won't do that.
Okay, so now we're ready to.
So we've got nickels, pennies, and cardboard soaked in.
But just not any penny. What year of penny did you need, Hunter?
Well, the pennies before 1982 are all copper, or mostly copper. The ones after 1982 are mostly zinc with a copper coating. Now, we happen to have something that Alessandro Volta did not have, but we're going to use it, which is a nice little device here.
Want somebody to
Okay.
hold that for you?
This is a nice little meter, which,
Hold on.
It's not on the camera yet.
okay, we'll get it on the camera.
We can't get the,
I tried to get my battery to light an actual light, but it's not powerful enough, so. I'll use this
Go ahead.
one. Okay, let's see, I'm gonna turn this to. Okay. So, we have our little meter here. So I'm going to touch one electrode to the aluminum foil in the bottom of the pile. Actually, Volta called it a pile. A voltaic pile, that's what they call
Watch
it.
your hand.
What? Is it covered? Can you see it now?
Yep, perfect.
yeah, that would be good there.
Okay.
We can see everything.
Okay, so here we go. Oops. All right, I'll switch it the other way.
The top layer is copper.
What's that?
The top layer is copper.
Yeah. Okay, here we go.
Wow.
There we go. So we got real live electricity being created.
How many volts you got there?
Well, I don't know exactly how to read this
Go up there and look, Don.
meter.
Read it.
We can measure the amount later. But we're getting something there. I think the actual amps, the amount of current is actually fairly limited, which is why it didn't light my bulb.
So that was that needle was showing the voltage, right? Is
That was showing voltage, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I did this experiment before. I just used lemons
Yeah.
or oranges,
Right.
and 2 different kinds of metal and stuck them in there, and then
Right.
that generated electricity.
Yeah. Did you light a bulb with it?
No, it wasn't that powerful.
I mean, I think if
That
you
would
get
take a
a,
lot of oranges.
if you get an LED bulb of the right kind, you might be able to light it. Anyway, so that's the first battery. Now, the significance of this is that it not only created electricity, but for the first time, you actually had a current that could, you didn't just have a spark, you had current over an extended period of time. And this led to all kinds of new discoveries. Yeah.
Sorry, how did they figure that out? I mean, what led to them like thinking to put copper and nickel and vinegar together?
Well, Volta recognized this thing with what Galvani was doing with the frog legs. And he somehow thought, well, it's not the frog leg that's causing the jumping. It's something with the two. He said there are 2 different kinds of metal here. And he said, I think that's something to do with.
So we'll have to look into what Galvani did.
Well, Galvani was doing these experiments with the frog legs.
Yeah, what was he doing?
Well, he was doing various things to experiment with, but what Volta noticed was there were 2 different kinds of metal. You know, there was the pan that the leg was in, and there was the scalpel. So there were 2 different kinds of metal, and Volta said, maybe that has something to do with it. So then he did his experiment and said, this is what's going on. So that was
they call that in science, I think, the confound.
What?
A confound.
Confound?
That if you have something else that could be accounting for the effect you see. So you design experiments in which you eliminate the things that could be confounding the result you're trying to show.
Oh.
So if you notice that was maybe what you're saying is you notice that was a compound.
Right, okay. I've never heard that term, but yeah. I mean, that's a common thing. We do that all, scientists do that all the time. They try to isolate what's causing a problem. I mean, I did it all the time. I did this the other night trying to figure out why I wasn't getting my light to work. I didn't really.
Yeah, Volta's pile was in a glass tube. It was, that high or something.
What's that?
Volta's pile?
Oh yeah, they made it.
Picture of it? It was in like a glass tube, like this high.
Oh yeah, they made them really high, and they did get some serious electricity with these piles. In fact, one of the things they did was they in the early 1800s they were doing some interesting experiments. One of them is you run a current through water with a little bit of salt in it, so the current will go through, and you can dissociate the water. You can get hydrogen and oxygen. And a similar thing, if you melt various compounds, you can separate out metals, elements. This is how Humphrey Davy discovered sodium, potassium, barium, a number of other elements. This was quite an advance in chemistry that was made in the early 1800s.
So they were melting things with electricity?
Yeah, melting and separating them out from the ores.
The electricity would break the molecular bonds between the atoms.
Exactly. Then one of the most important discoveries was made in 1820 by the Danish scientist Hans Christian Ørsted. And we have a picture of him right here. And he was somebody that Cooper had tremendous respect for. Because, Morse, not Cooper, Morse. In fact, Morse, later in his life, I guess what it was, 1860s, he went to visit Ørsted's home and laboratory in Copenhagen and met his daughter. But I want to show the experiment that was a tremendous breakthrough by Ørsted. We have it here is a compass. Actually, I'm going to put a little light in the circuit here too. No, I need it flat. Is it
Okay. Yeah. No, it's just,
Oh, yeah, it's not hard to see.
oh well.
You can't move the.
Well, maybe I could crop it up a little bit.
Zoom out.
I don't know, can you hold it vertical?
Will that work?
Yeah, that'll,
Well,
It needs to turn, doesn't
Will it
it?
still operate though if you hold it?
yeah, it's gotta be working.
Because you just wanted to show how it moves, right?
yeah. I don't know.
No, it has to be flat.
Oh well.
Gotta be able to turn.
I don't know. Well, yeah, that's probably not. Probably what we need is a mirror. Anybody got a mirror?
I have a little tiny.
Wow.
Something.
Anybody? Let's see.
Andrew, can you pull that camera off and just go up there from on top?
No, do I look like a girl and have a mirror?
What's that? Well, it would probably, it might work.
It's not gonna be stable camera.
What are you gonna need a mirror for?
Let's try it with a mirror.
Well, what
That's
about a
close
mirror on
enough.
a phone?
I-
Would that be clear enough? For a mirror chance to
There you go.
see? Is it? Yeah. Are you serious?
Oh, yeah, that'll work. That'll work.
That's quite,
We've got to get everything kind of straight in here.
Hurry up, Arnold, get tired fast. Use mine too.
Okay.
I have them, I can't see them.
Maureen's going to get a mirror. Okay. I think we may be able to do it like this, but let's, yeah, we may need it. Let's see. All right. Anyway, here's what Ørsted did. He had an electrical circuit. So I'm going to, if I move this, touch this, I'll complete the circuit. And you see I have the compass there.
Is that the battery that we've got? The pile?
Well, this isn't, but
No, but it's derived from.
yeah.
Functioning as a
Yeah.
pile.
Okay, now let's see what happens to the compass when I complete the circuit. Can you see that it moves?
Yep.
No, do it again.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Wow, the light goes on too.
Yeah. Well, that's just to help see that the circuit, the current is moving.
Oh.
So this was a big discovery, because what it means, the compass is magnetic.
It's not, actually attached to the current, right? It's just next to it?
Yeah, it's just in the vicinity, right. So this was a big deal, because it indicated what many people had suspected, but had not ever made any visible or any provable connection between electricity and magnetism. What this proved that there was an explicit magnetic effect of an electric current. And this set off a whole excitement throughout the scientific community. This was 1820. You had André Marie Ampère in France, who made the most thorough study of this new field that he called electrodynamics. And he had a whole series of ingenious experiments to study the actual impact of current elements. Like, one thing he showed that if you think two current elements moving in the same direction, parallel, they would have a force of attraction between them. If there are two parallel currents going in opposite direction, there'd be a force of repulsion. If there are two current elements not in the same plane, going at 90 degrees, there'd be no force either of repulsion or attraction. Now, it was not easy to design experiments to prove this, because with a current, you have to have a complete current. How do you measure just one element of a current, the impact on another element? It's not obvious how you would design an experiment to do that. So he had a whole series of experiments that were quite ingenious to do that. Now, one of the most controversial things, which is still an issue of tremendous contention today, is what he called the longitudinal force, which is the force between a current element here and a current element here, like in the same wire. Now, he demonstrated there is a force of repulsion between two current elements in those positions.
The elements are not touching.
Well, yeah, wherever they are. I mean, if you have a current here, wherever they are, whether they're, I mean, they obviously wouldn't be touching it most of the time.
Two wires in the same direction.
They could be in the same wire,
Oh, okay.
or they could be in different wires,
Probably a
wherever they are, whatever wire they're in. But it'd be a relatively weak force of repulsion. Now, Gauss and Weber further studied this longitudinal force, and there are all kinds of implications of this, which are highly contested today. And I mean, one of the things that comes out of it is the idea that at very small distances, like the distance, like on the scale of the atomic nucleus, you would actually have an attraction between like charges. Like on the scale of an atomic nucleus, protons would tend to attract each other instead of repel each other, which is like what they do. Now this was like in the 1840s. They were working on this, 1850s, before protons were even known of. So this was a kind of exciting thing. We don't have, in this presentation, we can't go more into this, but it's an exciting area which has a lot of implications for the development of fusion power.
I was
Yeah.
talking to Jason Ross about this, And he was saying that like now these days they have made up like all these crazy things like the gluon and whatnot to
Right.
explain like what's actually holding
Right,
these like the nucleus together.
right,
Whereas like if we kind of did more exploring in that direction, you wouldn't need to create all these other like reasons why.
right, right.
So
And the
that's
te-
not,
and
so
the
that's
text-
not actually accepted right now as a like as a scientific proof that you have this like attraction at the atomic level.
Yeah, look, the textbook
Right.
Maxwell equation, electromagnetic theory writes out that longitudinal force as it doesn't exist. So it's pretty amazing.
Doesn't the moon model explain some of this stuff?
Well, Moon was very interested in this. He talked about it, and it's related. I don't know actually a lot of the direct relation in terms of his model of the atom. I'm sure it's definitely relevant to that. Okay, now moving along. One of the inventions in the 1820s was the electromagnet. Now there are many different designs. The basic idea was the electromagnetic or the magnetic force with one straight wire is fairly weak. But if you coil the wire up, you're going to increase the magnetic force. And
Why does that work like that?
why does it work like that?
Is it just a concentration of the amount of wire? So the more wire you have, the more potential to build up force?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me kind of intuitively.
Oh, but also, if you're talking about how we did these experiments where if you had these parallel things, because if you wrap wire around, you have a lot of parallel wires, right?
Right.
So it would get really excited because they would all be attracting each other.
Well, that's one of the things that would be going on as well. Yeah.
As opposed to if you just had like a metal.
Yeah. Now there's another thing that would be going on too, which we'll get to in a minute, called inductance. But I want to, before we get to that, I do want to show you this electromagnet, and I don't know what I did with it. Here it is.
Electric motors have the wire wound hundreds of times around these individual magnets, which then
Over there.
Something just dropped on the floor when you picked that up.
allow it through this type of
Here's what I want. Paper.
relationship of the electricity going through there and the magnets to then turn that motor.
Yeah, Joseph Henry, who was one of the creative scientists of the day, who did a lot of work on electromagnets. He was a teacher in Albany, New York, and then at Princeton. And he had fun with his students in Albany, getting them. I mean, it's a lot of labor, a lot of work to wind these electromagnets, but he made some that would lift like over 1,000 pounds. I mean, and he'd have fun, doing these demonstrations, lifting up, anvils and all this stuff, and then lift the switch, and all this stuff come crashing down to the ground. Okay, so here we're going to see if our electromagnet will work. I just have a nail that has a bunch of winds of wire around it.
Is that copper wire?
Is that an insulated wire, like it's got varnish on it or something?
It's insulated, yeah. I don't know if it's maybe rubber, I don't know what it is, it's insulated, yeah. Now, let's see if it's strong enough to pick up this paper clip. I don't know if it is or not, we'll see. Well, what do you know?
Wow.
Okay.
Are you saying that it wouldn't do that if it doesn't have the wire wrapped around it?
Yeah, no, it's,
What's the other end?
I mean, most nails, if you pick them up, are a little bit magnetic, but clearly this is,
Is that,
well,
is
yeah,
the other
there it
end
is.
attached to something?
it's a little bit magnetic, but it's clearly a lot more if you,
Well, like if you just like put the charge on the nail without winding the,
Well, take the battery off.
well, no, if it was still connected to the battery but didn't have the wire wrapped around it.
oh, well, that would be another experiment to do.
Okay.
I don't think we can do it right here, but that would be worth testing. But clearly, if you have the, like this, it's got, no, no, interesting. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's only one.
Yeah, it seems to be partial to one side.
Well, that's interesting. If we had more time, we could investigate the different.
How many volts you got going through there?
Well, it's 4 of these.
Six.
Little batteries, I guess, yeah. Okay, so we can't spend more time on the electromagnet, but that's the basic idea. So anyway, it was in this milieu of experimentation that Samuel Morse was captivated by this idea of using electricity to communicate. And there were others, you know, in Europe and the United States who were looking at other approaches, as was brought up earlier. In fact, Ampere had proposed an idea of using 26 different circuits, each with like a compass on the other end. And so, one for each letter of the alphabet. So you could communicate each letter to, you know, to somebody at the other end. Now this was a pretty cumbersome arrangement. He never built it, but the idea was one of the ideas. Gauss and Weber had an idea, which they did develop at Göttingen University, for communicating between buildings at Göttingen University. Joseph Henry developed a system in his classroom at Princeton, and also developed a number of principles which he shared with Morse. But Morse actually developed a system that actually became viable as a you know, system that could actually work. And probably more than anything else, he's the one who had the stamina to fight to make it become a reality. And that meant a lot of public demonstrations. It meant a lot of time lobbying Congress to get funding to do the you know, to do a big demonstration, which was this demonstration between Baltimore or between Washington and Baltimore, a 50-mile long demonstration. And this was this was a big challenge because, you know, frankly, it wasn't clear he had all that he needed. In a certain way, it was like landing a man on the moon. He didn't exactly know he had all the technology to do it at that time. In fact, one of the things that was developed well, we'll get to that in a minute. It was a thing called the relay. Anyway, to kind of summarize the fight for this, he basically had to get $30,000 appropriated from Congress to build a test model. And he did the first demonstration to Congress in 1837, but it wasn't until 5 years later that finally got Congress to approve the money for the test. The original plan was to build it in conduits underground. But there were some problems with that. They ended up building it on poles 30 feet up. And then the first message was sent May 24th, 1844. And it's kind of funny. They sent the first message, you know, and there was some interest and excitement there. But what really got the people excited was the Democratic Convention was going on in Baltimore a few days later, and you know, they had this telegraph system set up, and you had these politicians in Washington, D.C., and they wanted to know what was going on. And so Morse, who was in Washington, had his partner in Baltimore relaying messages about what was going on at the Democratic Convention, and including, you know, the dark horse candidate Polk had won the nomination. So they got the proceedings and the outcome by telegraph before normally they would have been able to find out. So anyway, what I want to do now is see the picture of, well, let's see, we missed a few people here. Yeah, let's just go to, well, the Morse relay plant. Yeah, let's look at that one. Yeah, this is actually significant because what you see here, how do you do this? Oh, the button. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you see, here's an electromagnet. Here's an electromagnet. Here's an electromagnet. So what you do, see, because there's a problem sending one circuit over, you know, 50 miles. Even 20 miles was a big deal. I mean, first, even over 1,000 feet was a big deal. And this is one of the things that Joseph Henry actually worked on a lot, was this idea of, you have one circuit, an electromagnet can, what it does here is it pulls this thing, which actually completes another circuit, rather than you know, doing the telegraph signal itself. This thing just completes another circuit, which then completes another circuit, which goes on. So you can just have these circuits, which then, in the final end, goes to your telegraph receiver. So that was a major breakthrough, which enabled them to.
So it basically allowed every 20 miles to re-strengthen itself?
Yeah, you had a new battery. See the 1 and the 2 there; those were batteries.
Mm-hmm.
So every 20 miles, you'd have a new battery.
To give the charge.
To have a new circuit that was, and the electromagnet at D would just connect the new circuit.
How did they do that underwater?
Well, that was a whole other project. That was another that took some doing. I don't know all the.
A few mistakes.
Is it because you lost the electrical charge going that long a distance through the wire? And
Yeah,
so they had to have shorter distances to preserve the electrical.
Yeah, it definitely got diffused, and that was actually one of the things that Joseph Henry also discovered was the you know, this thing that's now kind of commonplace among electrical engineers. The higher voltage enables you to go much longer distances.
Yeah. Weren't cell phone towers a sort of a relay?
I don't know.
I know you gotta have them spaced so much apart so you actually get cell phone messages.
Yeah.
No, that has to do with VHF communications, I believe, wider side communications. Radio, that is the thing.
So let's see. Okay, let's see the picture of the original device. Okay, Morse's original device was actually quite complicated. It involved a this was the sending device. It had a hand crank. These little things here were little bumps that caused this thing to go up and down, and this connected and it opened and connected and closed the electrical circuit here. And then this was the receiving thing, which had a paper tape. It actually created a printed message on a paper tape. So this is actually quite complicated. Actually, what I wanted to show you is what I have, which is a much more simplified thing. I'll show that now.
Did they use, is that where the Wall Street thing came from, the chipper, the tape that scrolls across with the readouts on it?
It may be a derivation of that. I actually don't know, but it could well be.
How briefing is this going through paper tape?
Yeah.
Okay, now here's a simplified version of a Morse telegraph system. Here's the sending device, which is just a simple switch. Here are the wires going to the receiving device. Here you see just a vertical electromagnet. And then you have this, which has a paper clip, a thumbtack, which is just a piece of iron which will be attracted by the electromagnet. So the idea is you connect the circuit and it will create a tap there. Now, obviously, with the Morse code you have a short and a long. This is not elaborate enough so you get much of a distinction between a short and a long, but you can kind of get the idea. So, anyway, that's...
That would work. It's
What
the
did you
operator.
I don't know, you're the expert, I don't know. I don't know what I said.
Kind of like SOS to me.
I don't get it. How did they create the short and long on a?
Well, you just, well, like this is, I guess this would be SOS,
Okay, got it. That's it.
right?
SOS. Yeah, did dot, dot, dot.
So, see what happened is they had the complicated setup of Morse, and it went through a number of different transmogrifications. But pretty soon the operators of the telegraph began to realize they didn't need the paper tape. They could actually just hear with their ears what was going on, and they could operate. They didn't really need, they could do it just by ear, and they could operate a lot faster that way. So they got so they could do about, I think about 30 or 40 words per minute. So yeah, here's what became the well, this is one of the fairly early keys. This was actually used in the 1844 demonstration in from Washington D.C. to Baltimore. And here's the receiving register. It's a little bit hard to make out what's going on there. Do you have that other one? I think it's a little easier to see on that second. here's the electromagnet here. And here I think it's tapping, you know, here's the thing.
How big is that? Is that like inches or feet?
No, that's just inches, I think, you know.
It's like about 6 inches high, maybe? There's no scale to it.
Yeah, I think it's maybe 10 inches or something like that. But it's not all that big. So let's see, it's getting a little late here. Let me just kind of summarize a couple more things. I mean, this thing really took off very quickly. By 1851, there were 50 separate telegraph companies operating in the country. 50 different companies.
When?
1851. I mean, they did their tests, their Baltimore to Washington test in 1844. Within a couple of years after that, they had one from a commercial one operating in Washington and New York. A couple of years after that to Boston. There were different companies using different technologies. And then they started consolidating things. And then actually the first transatlantic cable was laid in 1858. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Is that from Rhode Island?
I think it was from Newfoundland
Oh.
to Ireland. It was not all that. I mean, it was not all that successful. It you know, it worked, but it was slow for some reason, and it didn't last all that long. Then they improved it. You know, the 1866 one was much improved. Yeah, there's yeah, this is laying the one in 1866. This was a big project.
You have 2,000-mile long cable.
Yeah.
On the ocean floor.
And when they broke, they could grapple the thing, pull it up, and splice it, and keep going.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. I mean, sometimes it took them a couple of weeks to find it.
Sometimes it was too deep to pull up. I mean,
Right.
you're pulling up something that, you know, 2 miles, that, you know, by the time it's 2 miles away, they're somewhat buoyed by the ocean, you know, but still.
So, anyway, in parallel with the development of the telegraph, you had other rapid-fire developments using electric currents. Dynamos are generators, were an alternative to batteries, and these were developed on the principle of electromagnetic induction. This was discovered by Joseph Henry and Michael Faraday in 1831. And this comes from a changing magnetic field will induce an electric current in a nearby wire. Now, a steady magnetic field will not produce an electric current, only a changing magnetic field. Now, the last demonstration I'll do here, just very quickly. Use our meter here.
Can you demonstrate a difference between alternating and direct? No, that's maybe. I thought direct current was I've heard a lot of current in there.
Placed it for the battery, device in there to change it. There it is again.
Like,
Oh, yeah.
He needs the light, he needs the light.
Oh, yeah, we've looked. Okay, what I have here is a coil of wire. And through all this spaghetti here, I've connected it up to the little meter. So there's no batteries in here. There's just one battery holding this up, that's all. And I have here a magnet. So I'm going to move the magnet through the hole in the wire.
Don't block the.
Oh, okay. And we'll see if anything happens. Now, this is not going to be all that impressive, but we'll see if anything happens.
Yeah, it's moving a little.
Jumps.
Yeah, it moves a little bit. This was not prepared to be terribly impressive.
Move.
So, anyway, on the basis of that little,
Singularity.
not very impressive experiment, that principle is what drives the generators at Hoover Dam and everywhere else.
They created modern civilization.
That's right. This is also how transformers work with alternating current. You know, if you have you know, a coil of wire here, and you have another coil of wire there.
Would the currents be going the opposite direction?
Transformer?
Yeah, and this, you have current going through this one, not just at fixed current, but starting and stopping, or alternating, going one way and then going the other way. That's the normal current we have coming out of it. It's alternating current. That will induce a current in this coil. And that's what you have in your, you know, your battery, or your, you know, your cords for your computers and so forth, the black box and your those are transformers.
The little power bricks.
Yeah, right. So anyway, so this is you know, big transformers. They can transform a high voltage to a low voltage, or the other way around. But this is the principle, is this principle of induction. You also have a principle of self-induction, where you actually have the wire will induce a current in itself. And that's something I don't thoroughly understand, but that actually gets to this question that you were asking, Alexandra, about the effect of the current on itself. I mean, these are the kinds of things that are important, but need to be investigated. Now, in addition, you also have development of, in this period, development of motors to transform electrical current into mechanical energy. These also began to be developed in the 1830s, but they weren't very efficient for a couple more decades. And in this period, shortly thereafter, you had electrical light bulbs, telephone, etc., 1880s. Now, what I'd like to do in the final few minutes, just to get people to kind of think about what we've become accustomed to in the last few decades here in the United States and in Europe, is a kind of stagnation, where we have not, I mean, the kind of rapid advancement of technology that you saw in this period, the 1820s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and so forth, we really haven't seen that in the recent period, or nowhere near the kind of potential that we could have seen. And most of us really, it's like we've kind of gotten used to this kind of stagnation. And you know, the potential that we have today, if you think of, you know, with Russia putting Lyndon LaRouche on national primetime television, and with China talking about the Silk Road, you know, interviewing Helga LaRouche, you think of what the potential is if we do our job here, if we do a little housekeeping in Washington, D.C., you know, we have a tremendous potential to unleash just a total renaissance. I mean, what was done with electricity, this is the tremendous potential that we have, only even more so with fusion power today. Just a complete horizon of unlimited potential that we have today. So that's what I'd like to end with. It's rather late to take questions. Yeah.
How does the quartz watch work?
That's a good question. I don't know.
We don't have time for it.
It keeps it quartz, you can put it through your electromagnet if you want to try it.
Well, I don't know. We can try it.
Let me ask you one question. Just one question. Actually, Mrs. Morse died.
That was really helpful because I have been talking to James Ross, and basically he took me through everything we did, but